Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello Podcats, I'm Lee Hutchison and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party Network, home to many amazing shows like Aggressive Negotiations, Nerd Nuptial, Missing Frames and all the rest, and you can find them just like us on thenerdparty.com. And I'm joined as always by Dallas. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Sue?
Yeah, not too bad. This is our kind of last podcast that we'll be doing together for sort of like a week and a half. I've got a holiday coming up on midweek, so it's going to be kind of nice to step away from the podcast mic for a few days. But I'm quite excited the idea of like coming back in like 2 weeks together with like loads of films to catch up on and talk about.
Well, hopefully, yeah, because it's been a bit light on the ground for me this week, but I've got a long list of things to try and catch up on this week as well. So.
Yeah, I struggled like 2 times this week. We were due to go see The Spy Who Dumped Me and Happy Time Murders and Yardie, and I had tickets booked for all 3 of them but never got round to it in the end. It's been one of those kind of weeks where dinner dates seem to have kind of dominated my schedule.
Yeah, well, at least with the Cineworld card you weren't actually paying for any of those, so...
Exactly, a small blessing. So it's as we've both alluded to, it's been a bit of a quiet week for us. What have you kind of watched at the cinema or watched at home that's kind of stood out for you?
The only thing I've really watched this week has been Searching, which I think you managed to catch at the
I did, yes.
Edinburgh Film Festival a couple of months ago. So I missed the unlimited preview, and then I think it was a preview the weekend before, but finally caught around to it. It was one that had caught my eye when the brochure first came out, and I'm a fan of John Cho, and I've been a fan of Unfriended, which I think you hadn't seen. It was a horror film that was basically set all within Skype, so I was interested to see how they would be able to do it. And yeah, I thought it was okay. It didn't set the world alight. I thought the some of the storytelling was good and effective in the way that they used the computer and stuff like that. But I did have some issues with it, which I will get onto later. But what did you think of it?
This was a movie that we highlighted in our Edinburgh film preview, where we were like, we're both quite excited for it in the concept as well, and it seemed to kind of really split opinion perhaps here, not in a this is terrible, this is great way, but in terms of a lot of people seem to find it quite, that was okay, and then a lot of people seem to really kind of resonate with it, whether that was down to John Cho, who is excellent in this as he always is. But for me, it was kind of like, I'm enjoying it, but the concept started to wear a bit thin when people were constantly using it just as basically a Skype call, like Skype calling the police, Skype calling this and that. I just find that became a bit tedious. I'd love to have seen perhaps a bit more inventive ways, or maybe just making the movie just a little bit shorter and tighter and focusing on inventive ways to kind of use these cameras and screens that are capturing this missing person story. Yeah, no, I mean, I really liked the beginning and how they used the computer in the beginning, where it sort of sets up it's clear that the dad is setting up Margot, who's the daughter in this film. She's about sort of 6 or 7, so he sets her up with a login on the computer to keep track of, storing the photos and videos from her school and growing up, and then it switches between the 3 logins on the computer. I mean, at this point, you can go into plot hole territory in the fact that they use the same computer for, she's clearly about 16, 17 at the end. So what, they have one computer for 10 years, they haven't updated it. I mean, yeah, that's just, you can destroy the whole film at that point anyway, but I'm not going to, even though I might have just have. But I really like the way that, it did annoy me as well.
Yeah, it's like you've got one Mac. I'm sure it made the Mac sounds, but it was a Windows setup. Again, I don't know. Well, again, it's just picking holes in something that, is clearly, it's never going to be bulletproof in terms of that. But I like the way it sets up the family dynamic, and how the mum's got the calendar up and it's got the dates for like her chemotherapy and stuff like that, because she's been diagnosed with cancer and stuff like that. And I thought it was a really it took maybe 3 minutes, but it really set up the story and what the family dynamic and what they are. I mean, I do agree with you. Yeah, surely there must be another way in order to get John Cho's face on the screen other than FaceTime. But I thought he did an excellent job, because that was the only way that he could really sort of get his emotion and stuff across, is basically because, I mean, at times it could be just a vocal performance otherwise, but I thought he did a really good job with a very limited sort of means of being able to get, in front of the camera. But I mean, I did think that this film it's going to be interesting to see what different age groups make of it. I mean, I was ahead of the game, I think, in terms of being able to spot the clues that were appearing, but whether it was in an Instagram photo or just in a news article that pops up somewhere for a couple of seconds. But I don't know if less tech savvy people they might just be utterly bewildered by what's going on, and all these apps and stuff like that in order to tell the story. But it does basically give a parent a step-by-step guide on how to hack into their children's social media accounts in order to keep an eye on what they're doing. Mm-hmm. It's a very clever way of going, oh, okay, but I guess, there could be a lot of fraudsters going, okay, yeah, I can see what I could do now, yeah. So there might be a lot of kids having to change their passwords, I think, at this point.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of my kind of small frustrations with it, and I think, like, with me, it feels kind of aimed perhaps at a sort of a younger audience. Like, my girlfriend loves these kind of shows, and I can imagine her, and I've said it to her, I've been trying to get her to go to the cinema, but we've not really found the time this week, where it's like the type of movie, if you're into those like 13 Reasons Why and all these kind of like sort of, not dumbed down, but these sorts of Netflix series where it's all kind of like, what's going to be the mystery this week? And it's all sort of a bit teen drama-esque. I can imagine them thinking like this movie is like their favourite movie of the year. And it could be like a gateway to sort of smaller independent movies in a way that it's not a big blockbuster movie, it's small budget as well, and it could be an insight into the type of movies that are out there beyond sort of the Avengers and some of the big screen movies that we usually all went to kind of see when we were young teens. Well, not necessarily the Marvel movies, but those ilk of movies. So I think it'll definitely find an audience there, and I think it's going to thrive on a place like Netflix, for example, if it ever gets released there.
I think so, yeah. And I mean, I think I read an article this week about some journalists were sort of saying, are serious movies going to disappear, and are we just going to end up watching superhero movies? And I was like, no, because the cinema exhibition industry cannot survive on 6 to 10 movies a year, because I know there's a lot of comic book movies coming out, but realistically there's not that many to sustain an entire industry. You need variety, you need alternative, because despite what people may think, there is a huge audience out there who does not want to watch Marvel films and DC films. They want something else, so there is that. But yeah, I think this is definitely something that it's easier to track the information on a big screen, when Facebook pops up and you're looking at all these things, but it would equally work as well just on a small screen as well. It's like if you're watching it on your laptop or something, it's basically, that's the perfect viewing for it. But I think the real issue I had was the sort of third act of the film. I mean, basically there's sort of two storylines going on. There's the fact that David Kim, played by John Cho, is trying to find his missing daughter, but then on sort of opening the social media accounts and whatever, he then realises he does not really know who his daughter is, and it's about finding out who his daughter is. But the third act for me, now, there's a TV show that was on Netflix earlier this year. I don't really want to mention the name, because if you haven't seen Searching and then I tell you what TV show it is and why they're very similar, you'll then be able to guess what's going to happen. But there was a TV show I watched on Netflix a couple of months ago, a sort of short TV series, and there's the third act. Basically, there's the reveal of that is pretty much identical to the reveal of what happened to Margot Kim in this film. And for me, I was like, oh, right, well, I've kind of just seen that already. So therefore, my enjoyment was slightly dampened by the fact that I'd just seen it. I mean, there'll be lots of people going to see Searching who have not seen this, and therefore their enjoyment will not be spoiled. But it's always that case of, the movie-going experience is different for every single person, depending on what baggage you take in. If someone was going to see Searching and had been through something like that, I'm sure their experience would be completely different to mine, because I've never had to go through something like that. So it's just one of those things. But yeah, the ending sort of let it down slightly for me, just purely because of something that I'd recently watched, which was very similar. So
Absolutely, and for me, I sort of saw a movie on the polar opposite of it, and I think we'll probably end up talking about this more perhaps in a couple of weeks when I return from my holiday. But I went to see Cold War, the much heralded and hyped new movie from Paweł Pawlowski, and who won the Best Director award at Cannes Film Festival, and it's the fascinating story of a simple love story that takes place in the 15 years from 1949 onwards, about two lovers in sort of rural Poland that kind of meet together through their love of music. And at the time that sort of Poland is kind of recovering from the post-war effects, and they're looking to kind of, rouse sort of Poland's kind of spirits really by bringing together these brilliant singers and dancers to essentially put on Polish folk shows and take on sort of a tour of Poland. And I'll kind of leave it there because I don't want to sort of kind of allude to anything more than that before you've had the chance to see it. But all I'll say is I came out of it a little lukewarm at first. I had so much respect for it. I think there was some fantastic moments on it, but I came out thinking perhaps it'd been a little bit overhyped. It maybe wasn't quite what I expected. But kind of in the past few days, I've really sort of thought on it, reflected on it, read a few interesting think pieces, and listened to some interviews. And it's one of these films that's growing more and more in my mind as each kind of passing day. So I'm really excited to kind of talk about it again with you in a couple of weeks' time. And I would recommend people to definitely seek it out. It probably is well worthy of the praise and certainly the Best Director award for Paweł Pawlowski. It's one of the most stunning looking films that you'll see this year. It's, it may be black and white, but the amount of kind of energy and colour that's bouncing off that screen with this sort of, anti-La La Land, as it's been sort of dubbed by some people, it's really well worth seeing, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, it is at the top of my list. Actually, no, it was at the top of my list to see this week, but C'est La Vie is only on for a few more days, which I also need to see. And Upgrade as well. I've heard a lot of actually good things about Upgrade, this sort of low-budget sort of sci-fi by Lee Winnell. So they are all on my list along with The Nun. So I've got a lot to catch up on this week, but I'm trying to prioritise basically based on what is going to be still at the cinema next Friday and stuff like that. So I've got a couple of days to catch up on them. But no, I've had like two different people sort of either message me on Twitter or sort of text me and stuff saying you need to see Cold War. It's something that you would absolutely love. So going on those recommendations, I'm definitely going to have to give it a watch, I think.
Yeah, I definitely think so, and I'm going to see Upgrade tomorrow. It's only showing at one of the chains here in Edinburgh. It's only showing at the View, so I'm going to catch it tomorrow as my last sort of movie before going away on holiday. So I'm quite excited to see it. It seems to have had as much hype perhaps as Cold War from a different sort of set of film fans. So I'm curious to see it. I've managed to avoid the trailer for it, much like I had with Cold War. So I'm curious to see kind of what it is and whether it kind of lives up to that hype. And I even though Cold War was the only film I saw at the cinema this weekend, I kind of did watch two films at home. One I'll kind of talk about in today's list, but I've continued with my 52 films by women, and I watched a movie that's on the UK Netflix called One Night, which is I was saying it to my girlfriend when she came into the room. I was like, and I said it before on this, that it goes to show that regardless of gender, no one has a monopoly on great films and terrible films. But One Night is genuinely a terrible movie. It's one of these ones that very much resembles a student script in terms of its hokey script. It's the story of two couples, one in their teens, one in their early 30s. That are talking and examining young love and jaded love on a sort of prom night. One couple are sort of, it's their prom evening, and the other, their relationship has started to kind of fall apart a little bit. So they decide to sort of go back to their kind of prom night experience. And what before trilogy makes look effortless as people talk about love and what it all means and what it's like to be, sex and gender and to grow apart, to fall in love, this movie does with an absolute cringe factor and a terrible piano piece that plays over everything that makes everything just feel that little bit cringier. So I wouldn't recommend One Night if you're looking to add that to your 52 films by women list. I certainly wouldn't recommend it at all.
I'll try and find another 51 or whatever films I need to watch before I get to that one.
Absolutely. And if you're looking for something kind of the polar opposite to a love story, out on Friday is Final Score, starring Dave Bautista and Pierce Brosnan. So I'm sure people have seen Dave Bautista kind of popping up on British TV over the past few days. And it's one of these sorts of films which seems to be kind of growing in a bit of a trend, that it's in select cinemas and it's also dropping on Sky Cinema on the same day. So it's out on September 7th, this Friday. And over the past few days, I had the chance to speak with the director of the movie, Scott Mann. So to give you a little bit of a backstory to Final Score, if you've not seen the trailer, it seems to be on all the time on Sky just now, especially if you're watching the football. Michael Knox, played by Dave Bautista, is an ex-soldier who must use all his military skills to save the 35,000 capacity crowd at a major football event at the old West Ham Stadium, and one of which is the daughter of his fallen comrade. So when the stadium is suddenly seized by a group of heavily armed criminals demanding ransom, Dave Bautista must come to the rescue. So enjoy our interview with Scott Mann, and we'll see you on the other side. Well, Scott, thank you very much for joining me. How did you get involved in this movie?
Well, it started off, I knew one of the producers from the last film I did, a film called, it was released under the name Heist. And they'd had this strange situation where they had, the stadium, the West Ham Stadium, was being handed over. It'd been sold, and the club were moving grounds. And they had this kind of window where the handover was leaving the stadium empty for, I think it was like 8 weeks. And the producer basically had spoke to them to see whether they would let a film production go on during that time in stadium. And so they had this weird thing where they had like a location set up and a thing happening, but no real film, and it was a very strange setup for making a movie in a sense. And so they'd gone out and had a bunch of writers pitch on the movie and do different versions, and then David and Keith Lynch, the brothers Lynch, they basically did an amazing job of getting together and actually making a good script out of it. So by the time it kind of arrived on my doorstep, that draft had just been written, and they had this really tight deadline of having to shoot a film before the stadium and the location is being shot and is demolished. So it was like a crazy gun to the head of deadlines, like I'd never kind of seen before, honestly. And so that all kind of happened. I think I got approached in February, and the film had to start shooting, I think by June, I think it was. And so we had this really kind of crazy intense period to put the film together before the stadium was gone. And so it was like it was a very strange situation, but in a weird way, films need. It's a weird one where films kind of need the potential to fill for them to happen, so it kind of really forced and focused everyone involved to get it made and to get it over the line. So it was a very strange one that kind of came about. Kind of, the seed of it was the strangest thing, but it was still, it was a good experience. It was crazy, but a very enjoyable experience putting it together.
That sounds like such a unique position for making a film. I mean, I'm a Spurs fan, so I have no love for West Ham, but was there sort of a pressure with like making a film like this where you're essentially, this will be the last time that stadium is seen on screen or can be used? Did you feel a pressure to make sort of like perhaps like a love letter to this stadium, a kind of bygone age?
Yeah, absolutely. Truth be told, yes, that was very much. We ended up living in that stadium. Like, we moved into the stadium and actually lived there whilst we prepped and then shot the film. So it became very kind of, you become kind of close to it, and it's very. And I think what we ended up doing, it was a bit of a love letter to the stadium, because it is like 100-year-old, it's like an old tank, an old ship, and it's kind of, and it's got all this history burned into it, and all the love of all these fans that for years, that's been their place of worship, and it was very. One of the things I'm pleased with on the film is that it's ended up that when I watched it with some fans, it's like seeing all these places that they're so accustomed accustomed to, but in this environment, kind of immortalised on the big screen is really nice. Like, it brings a tear to your eye. Like, I got upset, honestly, when I started seeing the stadium get demolished. It really upset me, and I was only close to it because of a recent event of being there. Mm-hmm. But it is really sad that the way, when it got taken down, it's a very kind of, it's kind of the death of something, but what's nice is we kind of managed to get all that. We got all the stadium on screen, and it kind of lives forever in a sense, like there in a nice way. And it's like, and we really embraced the West Ham side of it, honestly. Like, when it came to it, we were like, originally the film was like a fictitious club and all these kind of things, and we were like, let's make it about West Ham. Let's make it the last match. Let's embrace all of this side of it rather than push away from it. And one of the producers has been a lifetime supporter, and he kind of was a good guy to kind of ensuring that we kind of stayed true, and that there was a great respect given to the club. And it's a weird thing, because I think out of there was blurry lines of I would have, like, I remember getting a taxi once to the ground on Monday morning, and the taxi driver kind of explained to me that the reason why the ground was getting demolished is because there's a film crew there that are going to demolish it. It was like, I want to clear this up. This is not why you're there.
Yeah.
But I think we had a lot of support and help from all the fans making the film, and we had, and I think. And it's one of the really nice things about it, that we were able to kind of preserve this very important place, kind of forever in a sense. And it's nostalgic watching it for me. So I imagine it's going to be kind of very nostalgic watching it for fans, and seeing how we've kind of how we've incorporated the stadium as a character in all of this. And I think it's it's nice. It's one of the things that I really love about the film, and that I'm kind of proud of. That I think we did it proud.
What's the challenges for, like, shooting in a football stadium? Because we know what, especially something like kind of Upton Park with the kind of the tight kind of concourses. With directing an action movie, how do you go around kind of choreographing scenes and action scenes for things like that? Do you sort of supplement it with sort of other locations as well?
Not so much in this case, funnily enough. Like, we very much, like, from a mantra point of view, very much from the start of the movie, the only way we could get it together in the way that we needed to was really to kind of embrace and kind of use the stadium as a true location, and not fit. Like, we looked at things like, a good example is, there's a scene in the film, like, two aspects of this. One is you kind of look at it from the creative side, like, walk around the scene literally with the writers, and we kind of, and you look at the stadium and say, what would be cool here, this would be cool here, and you get to explore and go through different places. And I remember we had, like, one of the stewards, which we named after, we named one of the characters after a steward who showed us access all areas one time when the stadium was still in its kind of last weeks of use. He kind of took us up to the rooftop and did all this stuff, and we kind of envisaged scenes and things that we could tie into the narrative that would be a lot of fun, and we could have a lot of fun with. And like, one of them is like, we doing a bike chase. I remember seeing, like, I always like to put a vehicle chase element into movies, especially action movies. I always think it's fun, and it was like putting a bike chase in and around the ground was great, and it was all kind of to be topped off with basically Bautista doing a big kind of jump from the bike, from one stand to the next, was kind of this thing of this stunt we envisaged from early on. At a moment that would have been really nice, and when we looked at that of how to do it, we were looking at rebuilding elements of the roof in the studio, using CGI, like doing all these things to make it happen. And ultimately what we boiled down to is no, let's just do it all for real, and really have a guy do that jump on a motorcycle across the stands, and use the location and use it, and obviously make it safe and use wire work, and we'll have to remove wires, but ultimately embrace that stadium and embrace the location we've got, and so for that and a number of other things, we largely filmed, 95%, if not more, was all filmed in location on the ground and in and around it, and we avoided fakery wherever possible, and kind of tried to get the value and the most out of the, of what was really a huge asset to the film,
Absolutely. And obviously you've got a great cast. You've got Dave Bautista. It's brilliant to see him in the leading man role, and Pierce Brosnan he'll always be my James Bond. What was it like working with these guys? Obviously this is your second time with Dave Bautista.
Yeah, it's like Bond and Bautista, right? It's great. It's it was lovely. I'd worked with Dave, and he was, I had a great experience with him on the last film, and we became buddies, and I think it was very much like he was kind of underrated, really, in terms of what he is capable of and what he can do, and so him playing this kind of lead, it was really exciting and a great opportunity to kind of show a side of Dave that people I don't think normally see, and he was like heavily involved. And as I said, because of the nature of the film, it became a kind of creative part of us all kind of contributing into it, and Dave became a big part of that, and became really kind of embraced the production film side of it as well, which was great. But with Pierce, it was like he is such a sweetheart that he was so lovely to work with, that he kind of extremely professional, but knew kind of just delivered. I mean, he's one of those guys where he can just he must prep. It's all. I'm sure it's all down to the prep and the experience, but he kind of comes in and he's just able to do his thing. He was fantastic to watch, and just just very nice, very aware of kind of the dynamic of a set and the relationship, the kind of family relationship that a cast have. He was very kind of good with that, and he would just he would regale stories of of his first time seeing James Bond, and things, like little treasures like that he would give to the cast and crew, and yeah, so he was wonderful, and he's got a wicked sense of humour as well, so it all kind of helps alleviate those 4 a.m. late nights when you're trying to kind of get it done, and he's cracking the old joke here and there. So he was wonderful, that's when things on set, it's a real pleasure, right? When you work with great talent and everyone kind of rushes together to kind of create something. That's when they're the moments that you really, really enjoy,
And finally, with the film, it's getting kind of a release next Friday, the 7th of September. It's getting released in cinemas and on Sky Cinema. Does it feel exciting to be part of this continuing revolution of sort of simultaneous releases? People getting a chance to see things on more than just the cinema. They can watch it at home. They can see it at the cinema. Absolutely. Is it exciting to be involved with that?
Oh, it's hugely exciting. I love it. I think the way that film in the last 10 years and television, media as a whole, right? It's evolved into a place where, especially for feature films and then in the kind of low middle ground space, you kind of they've been pushed out, and it's been very difficult from since heavy piracy and the rest of it has kind of created this place where it's very hard to get films released or kind of get films the kind of exposure they need, and really the industry has to adapt, right? And it has to change to kind of, so you can have the right kind of exhibition for a film, but for the modern audience, where there's some kind of choice there. And I found it. I think there was 2 ways it could go, right? It's like you can either be depressed about kind of that kind of crossover, or you can be excited. And I was absolutely so excited when I heard about Sky's plans and about what they were doing, because I think that's the future, right? You have to. Having the film experience, watching a film in a theatre, is a very different experience than watching it at home. But there's valid reasons for doing both. But I think the way that doing this kind of do we have to kind of find a balance in releases? I don't think one or the other is the answer. So I don't think kind of pure streaming with no theatrical element is the answer to to get to the film industry. And I think something like what Sky are doing is a really exciting step into, it's really exciting for filmmakers. That's what I think, and I think that's something of great value as well. That if you look at kind of, if you were to go for just a pure streaming choice, for example, which there's a lot of fruit out there to pick from in that department. I think a lot of filmmakers are not so keen because it takes away the theatrical window and that element. And I think what's exciting about Sky is because they're embracing that. It feels a much more filmmaker friendly strategy, and I think that I'm really excited to see how it goes. I'm curious as well, obviously, because it's kind of uncharted territory to a sense, but I'm curious to know how it'll kind of play out and how things are measured and how things go. But it feels exciting to be part of something new and that feels like the future rather than the past, you know.
Absolutely. Well, I wish you all the best with the release, and I look forward to watching it as a double bill with some Super Sunday football and then tuning into Sky afterwards. So I wish you all the best and good luck with the next with everything to come. Cheers, thanks. So that was our interview with Scott Mann. So thank you very much for him coming on the show. So I'm definitely looking forward to sort of the movie. I think it could be an interesting double bill with a game of football, and it kind of I'm a sucker for these sort of Die Hard in a kind of movies. So Die Hard in a football stadium is a movie I never thought I needed until just now.
Well, yeah, it's I love it's always great to see another Die Hard in a thing, but it also it reminds me of a Jean-Claude Van Damme film from I was going to say a few years ago. It was probably more like 20 years ago. It was A Sudden Death, where it was Jean-Claude Van Damme in an ice hockey stadium that gets unsurprisingly taken over by terrorists. You know, they always pick these things, and then he has to fight them all single-handedly and do the splits and like a few kung fu kicks and stuff in it. So it's nice to see that it's been updated. But I just love the fact that it's set at West Ham Stadium and stuff like that. It's just one of those great things that they're properly leaning into as well. So.
Exactly. I suppose when you've got an empty football stadium, and I just love the idea that I was kind of curious, like, why West Ham at first? And then it was just like the idea that we've got this empty football stadium. Okay, movies, studios and companies, pitch what you want to do with it. I think that is the coolest thing. And so, yeah, I'm very, very curious to see it. Like, any friend that I kind of mention it to, they're always like, is that the film with the motorcycle that jumps off the roof? And it's like, to kind of have that kind of iconography in a movie like this, you're like, yeah, it is. It looks pretty interesting. I'm curious to see Pierce Brosnan in a sort of polar opposite Mamma Mia movie, and it was good to hear from Scott that he is the sweetheart that we probably all hoped he would be on a film set as well.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, you need a money shot in a trailer like that, and it's just great to see them. Yeah, it's like, yeah, why not use the stadium for something like that? Although I did hear another podcast interview with Dave Bautista, and he was saying that they went back to do reshoots, but the stadium had already been destroyed and they were already building the flats or whatever was going up in its place, so they had to find somewhere else to film it. So that tickled me pink.
Absolutely. But now kind of moving on to sort of our main high fidelity style top 5 list for today. This one was inspired by listener and friend of the show, Sean McDonald, who actually left us a really, really nice iTunes review. So thank you very much to Sean for doing that. But he, as a Barca boy himself, has asked what our kind of top 5 foreign language films are. So we were kind of talking about this early last week. Should we make it European? Should we make it worldwide? And we decided to settle with just our strictly kind of European films. We could only have one film per kind of country, so we can't just fill it all with French films. So we kind of have settled with top 5 European films. I'm sure we'll do a rest of the world or Asia kind of down the line, but so hopefully, Sean, you'll enjoy our top 5 list, and I'm sure you'll have seen some of these films, or maybe some of them will be ones that will be brand new to you. So thank you again for your iTunes review and listening and your kind words on Twitter. We really do appreciate it. So how did you find this, Dallas? How was it for you picking this top 5 European films?
It was a lot more difficult than I initially thought it would be, because when we're originally talking about sort of foreign language films, it was like, oh, that's easy, I've got loads. But then I realised that the majority of them were probably from the Asian continent. I love sort of Asian horror and stuff like that, so there was quite a few in there. But then when we went European, I thought, oh no, it'll still be easy. But then it was, all right, okay, well, it's got to be not in the English language, it has to be foreign films. So it can't be films just set in Europe, because, I mean, that's an entirely different list. And then there was the one film per country, which scuppered me quite a lot, actually, because I think Italy could have potentially had top 5. France could have been another top 5 in itself. But I am happy with my list. Number 5 has gone back and forth on up until the point that I say it could be something else. But I think I'm fairly confident. Definitely in the top 4. The number 5, I've decided to go with something that maybe people haven't seen, because if we can get a few people to watch a film that we really like that maybe hasn't had a big audience before, then that's good. So yeah, that's what I've gone with, I think.
Excellent. Well, fire away. You've teased this number 5. I'm curious to hear what it's going to be.
Well, my number 5 film comes from Spain, and it is Time Crimes by Nacho Vigalondo. Have you seen Time Crimes?
Interesting. No, I haven't. I always remembered him being sort of hyped. I remembered Mark Millar, the Scottish comic book writer, had sort of done this comic book. I can't remember what it was called. I've got it in some
Super
box somewhere.
Crooks, I think it was the one that he was
Super
going to
Crooks.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, he was going to do it, and I remember there was a lot of hype around it, and it was like, ooh, like he'd done this film, and I'd sort of read up on it. I said, oh, I can sort of see the connection why this guy was doing it, and then it sort of completely vanished from the kind of the conversation. So yeah, that was one of these sorts of weird movies that kind of never happened. So yeah, tell me a little bit about this one then.
Okay, so yeah, I was just looking, and then yeah, Super Crooks does seem to disappear, but I don't know now that Miller World, all the Miller World titles have gone to Netflix. Perhaps there's a chance that it will resurface, but people perhaps in the US and in the UK maybe may know him slightly more for Colossal, which came out a couple of years ago, which starred Anne Hathaway, who discovered that she was basically empathically linked to a giant kaiju that was trampling all over Korea. But this is it's called Time Crimes, and it's a very low budget film written and directed by Nacho, and it's a time travel movie where an unassuming man sort of goes to his country house for the weekend and sort of is out in the back garden just just enjoying himself. His wife goes off into town and he's got these binoculars and he looks and he sees a woman undressing in the woods. So he goes in to see what's going on, finds out that she's been sort of knocked unconscious, and then he gets sort of stabbed in the arm by a man who's sort of wrapped up in bandages, and then he sort of runs away and basically hides out in this building, which turns out to be a laboratory, and the man inside basically, he says, oh no, I'm being chased, so the guy says, oh, just hide in here, but it turns out the thing he's hiding in is a time machine, and he gets basically sent back an hour, and then it's basically the story sort of develops that he's basically trying to stop this chain of events from happening, but every single decision that he makes basically makes things worse, and it's sort of this sort of snowball effect that comes to quite a sort of shocking and sort of horrific conclusion. But it's one that I sort of really, really enjoyed, and just sort of was one of time travel films can always be very problematic in getting all the sort of dominoes to stack up, so it totally works out. Back to the Future is still, for me, the greatest example of a time travel film, but this is a slightly different take on it, but one that I thought was executed really, really well, and I highly recommend any sort of fans of sort of sci-fi time travel movies to check it out. But it's one of those ones that sort of transcends any sort of language barriers and stuff like that to just become like a really sort of top great thriller.
I definitely need to check that out, and I'm almost sitting there thinking, right, we need to do a top 5 time travel movies, and one day I think we could certainly make an interesting one there.
I think we could make an interesting one by not allowing Back to the Future to be in it, because that's a given that it'd be number 1. So yeah, top 5 time travel movies that don't include Back to the Future would certainly make for an interesting list.
It certainly wouldn't be my number 1. All I'll say is that I can think of another one that would top it by miles.
Is it Back to the Future Part 3?
Yeah, I definitely... that was the first one I ever actually saw, funnily enough. But I think that's a movie I definitely need to check out. It sounds kind of right on my street. It seems to be for kind of Europe. We never really seem to do too much in the way of kind of sci-fi movies, so I think I need to get that rectified. Absolutely,
yeah. It's one that I think, I'm not even sure if it really got a proper cinema release over here. It's just one of those ones that maybe I found one day in sort of a DVD shop or something, and I was like, oh no, I'll give that a go. And yeah, no, I was very, very well pleased. And I think if anyone does manage to find it, I've just checked, Netflix doesn't have it, but it could be on Amazon Prime or something. But if you do get the chance to see it, I highly recommend it. So what have you gone with as your number 5?
Yeah, I find this quite difficult as well, and it sort of exposed a bit of a hole in my sort of film viewing for me. That I am a fan of European cinema for sure. I always catch them at film festivals and here at places like the Film House, which specialise in them so well. But it seemed to be so much of mine were kind of dominated by sort of the past 15 years. That sort of there's some early kind of mid-90s ones, but there seems to be a lot of kind of gaps sort of earlier than that. You know, a lot of kind of what we probably consider traditional European films. So that's something I'm going to maybe have to look at maybe next year. That could be my new sort of 52 film thing for next year, is sort of, you know, kind of older European films. So kind of mine seem to be sort of dominating kind of the last 10, 15 years. But
I think I was the same. I was worrying that, am I focusing too much on, you know, sort of like the year sort of 2000 onwards. It's like, but then I went back through all the lists and stuff like that, and I thought, well, you know what? No, the films I like are the films I like, and yeah, you shouldn't feel bad for, oh no, I haven't seen, you know, this 1930s Russian film. So what, you know. There's, like you say, there's still time to watch these things, and who knows, if we did the list in a couple of years, you know, it might be completely different. But I mean, I've got a couple of films from the past, but yeah, again, just from when I started, I think I started watching sort of European cinema and stuff probably around the year sort of 2000. That's when I really started to broaden my sort of cinematic palette, and so yeah, it's there's nothing wrong with most of the films coming from that, because they're the ones that we've seen, and also I think there's been more opportunity, certainly in the UK, to see sort of independent and foreign films since sort of around the year 2000, and I've got one that was from around about that coming up as well. So, but I've sidetracked.
Excellent. So my number 5 is a 1930s Russian film. Ha ha ha. So I went with the 2015 Italian noir mafia crime film Subaria. So obviously, it kind of, maybe people might know that as sort of as the Netflix TV series at the moment, which is actually a prequel to this movie. But Subaru was a kind of movie that came along with, you know, it sort of came a bit out of kind of nowhere for me, really. It was one I kind of caught at the film house. And I think I had a kind of an annual leave week, and it was like, right, what am I going to fill my days with, right? What's on at the cinema is often my kind of go-to choice. And this movie, like, really caught my attention. It's a sort of it gives a sort of huge scope and scale to Italy, and what it is, it kind of looks at political corruption, religious corruption within the mafia, as sort of there's an attempt to sort of make this seafront area of kind of Rome into sort of a Las Vegas style kind of area of the city, and all the people that are going to be involved in that decision, from kind of council planners to local leaders to kind of the different heads of the mafia, which have made a pact to kind of see this project through. And the scope and scale of this film is just brilliant. It's kind of filmed with so many great performances, and I mean, the movie opens pretty much with like the resignation of the Pope, so it gives you this kind of idea that this isn't just something that's small, it's sort of institutional corruption at the highest level, and it's got some fantastic action sequences. And I remembered when the director, Stefano Solomia, he ended up being attached for Sicario 2 and directed it. I was really excited because a film like this shows you that a guy could make a Sicario 2, and it just feels frustrating that the screenplay really let him down. And like, he is a brilliant director, and I hope he gets another shot at sort of a big American movie like that. But this movie is really, really well worth seeing, and one of the things that I love in particular about it is that it's soundtracked by a lot of M83 music as well, so there's so much use of kind of neon and nighttime as well, that a lot of the kind of action takes place in places like that, and kind of clubs and back rooms, and just sort of the music of M83, if anyone's familiar with them, just kind of complements it so well. It's definitely one of the best kind of modern day mafia movies that I've seen in a long time, and I think it's so good. I really need to get round to watching kind of the Netflix TV series. I just need to kind of find the time. So yeah, I highly recommend that one.
Yeah, no, that's one that I've seen, and again, sort of at my local film house. But yeah, there was a sort of run of some really good sort of crime movies coming out sort of Europe around. Well, actually, that was sort of 2015, but about sort of 5 years earlier, you had Gomorrah, again, sort of looking at the Italian crime families, and A Prophet as well from France. That was one of the best films I'd seen, I think, that year, but not good enough to make it onto my list. But yeah, no, there's some cracking sort of crime films out there that, and again, yeah, sort of that are perfect for sort of adapting into sort of serializing into TV shows and stuff like that can find audiences either on sort of like All 4 or Netflix. I think now is the perfect sort of medium for that kind of thing, I think.
Absolutely. So what's your number 4 then?
Number 4 is a film, one of the biggest foreign language films to be released in the UK, and it's a film that some people might find slight or twee, but one that just can't fail to bring a smile to my face, and that is Amelie. And
interesting. I've never seen Amelie.
You've never seen Amelie? Well,
I've never seen Amelie. It's on my list, and see, when I was looking for some inspiration, I was like, Amelie's there. It's ridiculous because I know I'd love the movie. I know I would love it. I don't know why I've never seen it. I'm not even going to pretend it's because the director directed Alien Resurrection as well. But yeah, I really need to get that rectified. So pitch it to me. Tell me why I need to kind of put this to the top of my list.
Well, the soundtrack is just amazing. The soundtrack's great, but I mean, it's the film that basically launched sort of Audrey Tautou to the masses and beyond France. It's one of those films which managed to transcend, certainly in the UK, transcend the sort of language barrier, and it's just an incredibly sort of sweet tale of this young woman who's very shy, sort of very introverted. She's got all these hobbies. I mean, she's basically, is teasing her father by kidnapping his gnomes and sort of sending them around the country, getting on their holidays and taunting him with these photos that get sent back. But she's always concerned she always puts other people first. So she's always trying to set up, there's a lonely waitress. She works as a waitress in a cafe called Le Du Moulin, sort of near the Moulin Rouge, and there's one lonely waitress and one lonely guy who's always in there. So she sort of basically engineers a plot to get them together, but she's always putting other people first at the expense of herself. And finally, she sort of slowly but surely begins to fall in love with this guy who's obsessed with these sort of scraps of photos which are left behind from the sort of photo booths that you get in railway stations and stuff like that. So it's just really sort of sweet, and she sort of talks sort of to the camera, sort of doing the whole sort of narration thing and sort of breaking the fourth wall and stuff like this, and telling everyone about what makes her happy and stuff like this. But it's about her eternal search for happiness, which I'm not going to give anything away, but yeah, she might get it in the end. Who knows?
Yeah, I need to just see that. I need to just get round to it. It's one of these ones that's pathetic that a fan like myself of European films and film in general hasn't got around to seeing it. I'm aware it's a shortcoming. I will look to improve myself.
Never too late to see a film for the first time. There's always time. So
absolutely.
So what have you got at your number 4?
Yeah, I've gone with a kind of interesting movie here. So it's a German-Austrian comedy. That'll immediately catch people off by Mark, because people have made the same joke about it every single time. A 2.5-hour German comedy? I never. It's Toni Erdmann, and it was one of my favourite movies of 2017 when I saw it released. I don't know if you've seen this one.
I have, yeah, and unfortunately for me, I couldn't get on board with it. I don't know, the humour just didn't seem to work for me. I mean, it was like people were saying this is the best European film of the last sort of decade and stuff like this. But when I finally got around to seeing it, it was just something just didn't work for me. But that was just my own personal taste. So tell everyone what you loved so much about it.
Yeah, I loved it for the humour, I must admit. Maybe it's the fact that I just always find kind of German comedy and the German people and their sort of view of the world just quite funny and charming. And it was just one of these movies that there was so many kind of just sort of memorable moments for me. This character that's created of sort of Toni Erdmann is just so kind of larger than life, that this dad is like stalking his daughter. Oh my god, it sounds incredibly problematic when I say it like that. By putting on sort of weird wigs and fake teeth and like going to sort of her work nights out and introducing himself as this sort of lifestyle coach. And it's incredibly kind of sweet to see that sort of connection between this older dad and this sort of stiff uppertight, this sort of German stereotype of what their women are like. And it kind of when he sort of starts to wear her down, starts to make her kind of find herself again. Her rendition of like Whitney Houston's Greatest Love of All at this sort of Romanian family's Easter party is fantastic. And for a film that's 2.5 hours long, I mean, it's got one of the best comedy set pieces I've seen in years as well, where she almost this character starts to have a complete meltdown. So her dad's worn her down, and Innes is kind of like, right, I'm going to have a birthday party, and this isn't something for her. She's kind of got it planned as sort of quite a professional one. There's going to be pastries and such like, and then she decides to just strip off naked, and then one person after another comes to this party, and they are either stripping off or feeling very odd about the whole situation, and it's one of these ones that just keeps piling up and becoming more and more awkward, and it's just got so many great comedy set pieces which you'd kind of hope for and expect in a kind of comedy movie like this, especially one at this kind of length as well. And I just think it's a really good movie about kind of finding yourself and that father-daughter relationship that we don't kind of see too much, whether it's kind of younger, siblings, younger father-daughters, or kind of older ones. It's something we don't really kind of get too much of. And I think just with this, just even kind of how the film ends, it's all about just putting a smile on your face and how that kind of makes you feel. And I think this film, really made me feel that way. And I remembered I watched it myself on Valentine's Day last year, and it was probably one of the best Valentine days I've ever had. So I have to give it a bonus point for that as well. And I think there's talk that this movie is going to be made into an American version starring Jack Nicholson, so that will be interesting. I could see him for sure as a Tony Erdmann, but it seems to have gone a bit quiet on that news front at the moment, so I'm gonna wait and see what happens there.
Yeah, no, I was actually looking at my list earlier and thinking, I've actually managed to pick only one film that has actually been remade by Hollywood, and then I was thinking, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Because certainly if I'd picked my Asian top 5, I think every single one of those films would have been remade by America, but perhaps that's a good thing that they haven't been remade, that there is still basically they're either the US doesn't rate them enough to remake them, or there's just something about them that cannot be sort of translated into the sort of the American sort of style of filmmaking, perhaps. But yeah, no, it's be interesting to see what else you've got on your list, and we can avoid any sort of remakes. But I do have one, but
I've got one as well, and I have a feeling it might actually be the same one.
Okay, well, that's probably not at my number 3, because for number 3 I'm going to Germany this time, and I finally picked an all-time classic, and for me it's Fritz Lang's Metropolis.
Excellent choice. Why have you put this all-time classic at just number 3?
Just number 3 because personally I would enjoy watching the films I've got at number 1 and number 2 more, but for me, because you're going only one from each country, Germany sort of sprung up, and I was like, oh no, out of the German films it has to be this one. I mean, as a one of the biggest Blade Runner fans, sort of going, it'd be impossible to talk about Blade Runner without talking about the influence of Metropolis, and I was lucky enough to see it on the big screen. I think it was last year or the year before, and it was sort of this what you couldn't call it a director's cut, but it was like they'd found sort of restored lots of footage and stuff, so this was around about sort of 2.5 hours. But if anyone doesn't know what Metropolis is, it was made in 1927. And it was looking at the future, so it was the year 2026, so it was 100 years in the future. And it's about, this bustling metropolis in Germany, with these really tall, sort of futuristic-looking buildings, and how the son of one of the guys in charge of everything sort of one day finds these sort of poor-looking people, and he sort of follows them down underneath the buildings and finds out that this entire sort of city is being propped up by the labour and stuff of these people, the poor people who are working underneath in these mines and under these buildings to keep the power going and stuff like this. And it sort of then builds up to the sort of power struggle between the two sort of classes, and there's a whole sort of subplot where the leader of the working classes is then replicated by the rich people in the form of a robot, who then sort of tries to sabotage everything. So it's just one of those amazing films, so ahead of its time, and it's one of the first sort of real sort of science fiction classics, and it's a film which was actually, having watched it a couple of years ago, it really does actually, it still holds up to this day in terms of its style, the sort of look of the film, and the soundtrack and everything is just fantastic.
This is another movie that I've never seen either, and it's one of these ones that frustrates me because it seems to have kind of multiple chances. It seems to pop up at the film house, for example, at least once a year, and I don't know why I never seem to get round to it. It's definitely a missing frames for me.
Absolutely, it's one that I would definitely recommend you watching. I mean, there is several different cuts out there, so I mean, if you ever get it on Blu-ray or whatever, there's probably a few different cuts. But I think at the moment in the cinemas, you might occasionally get the chance to see the full 2.5 hour cut, and it's one that's highly recommended. And I think the last version I saw had a new score attached, but it's one that if they ever did like the opportunity to see it with a live orchestra score, I think it would be something truly special.
Definitely, I'm looking forward to checking that one out.
Excellent. So what have you got at your number 3, and which country are we going to this time?
Yeah, we're going to Spain, and I've gone with Pedro Almodovar's The Skin I Live In, and potentially I could have this as number 1 in my all-time horror movies. This is a movie that absolutely creeps me out to no end. So this is the story of I want to say as little as possible in case people haven't seen this one, but it's about a plastic surgeon, Robert Legard, who's successful in cultivating artificial skins which can help with burns and insect bites, and he has kind of been testing it on this young woman who lives and is trapped within this man's mansion. And if that doesn't sound kind of creepy enough as it is, the entire movie plays in the past and the present, and we see this doctor dealing with a horrible trauma that happens to his young daughter, and then we sort of have this experience with this young girl in the future where everything isn't quite as it seems, and there's a really odd sexual relationship going on with Antonio Banderas's Robert Legard, and it's one of these movies that when I was watching it kind of for the first time, you're watching it and it's like you're going along with it. It's bizarre, it's interesting, the performances are really weird. It's very problematic behaviour is on show, and you're kind of watching it and you're starting to kind of go with it, and there's a moment where it all clicks, where these these timelines kind of come together in one moment where you're like, oh my god. And it's very rare that I'm surprised or blindsided by something, and this movie did exactly that. It's a really terrifying body horror movie, and it presents a lot of questions and about what would you do if you were in this situation? Did someone do the right thing? Where's too far? How do we kind of deal with revenge? And it's one of these movies I'll never ever forget watching that in the cinema the first time. And we all talk about sometimes with movies that the best movies to see in the cinema are blockbusters, and everything else can be seen on Netflix because it's not big and in space or CGI. Where something like this, where you're in a cinema and you feel that kind of claustrophobia, in a dark room, there's no interference, and you're in there, you can't turn away, you can't look away. And I think a movie like this absolutely nails what's brilliant about an experience within the cinema, and it's one I will genuinely never forget. And it's a classic in my eyes.
I'd completely forgotten about this film until you brought it up just then. I'd briefly thought about looking at the Almodovar back catalogue for something for Spain, but then I just completely forgotten about this one. But I have now been brought back to I can now remember exactly what I was thinking when I was watching this film, and I was like, no, oh my god, I cannot believe that they're doing this. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like it goes to places you truly do not expect, and it is. Yeah, I think Pedro Almodovar said it was like a horror movie without the screams and the frights, but it is something truly shocking and terrifying. And yeah, it's one that you will not forget in a hurry, although I clearly forgot it over the last couple of years. But yeah, it's something I really need to revisit, because it's one of those films that you can only watch for the first time once, and it's a hell of an experience when you do.
Absolutely, and it's certainly not for everyone. It's definitely not a date movie, and I unfortunately made that mistake at the time.
Yeah, no, it's was it? Wow, that must have been. Now that's definitely a first experience you're never going to forget.
No, and I was banned for many a year with kind of cynical responses if I ever suggested a film for picking the Let the Right One in. It's certainly not for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
No, absolutely not. And I guess speaking of that one, I guess that segues nicely into my number 2, because it is Sweden's Let the Right One In.
That's my number 2.
That's your number 2. Excellent. Yeah. Well, this is the only one on my list, and I guess your list as well, which has been remade by America, but it's one of those ones which I just fell in love with the first time I saw it. I just thought it was an incredibly, I mean, it's billed as a horror film, but for me, it's almost more of a love story. It's sort of like the sort of Romeo and Juliet style of two people who cannot be together but are destined to be together, and it's about a young boy called Oscar who lives in I guess a sort of council estate in Sweden, and one day he gets new next door neighbours in the form of a young girl called Eli and her what seems to be her father, but there's something clearly not right with their relationship, and it slowly becomes apparent that Eli is a vampire and is feasting on the locals, and but she strikes up a relationship with this young boy, and she wants to get to know him and sort of protect him and stuff like that. And it's really about their relationship and how the relationship also is with her. I think the official term is like a carer, or someone who's basically making sure that she gets food and stuff like that, in terms of people to kill and things like that, and blood to drink. But again, that's a relationship which is explored, thankfully not as graphically in the same way as the novel, which I've also read, which goes to a rather horrific dark place, which I'm glad they cut out of the film. But it's just one of those films which is just so beautiful to watch. The direction is fantastic. It's run by Thomas Alfredson, who did Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is fantastic, but he also did The Snowman, which wasn't. So the less said about that one, the better. But this, for me, was just utterly beautiful and beguiling, I think, and one of those truly great European films which transcended to become just a fantastic film in its own right, I think.
I think it's one of these movies, like, when it was released as well, it was sort of a great bit of counter-programming to something like kind of the Twilight movies, which were, I've only ever seen like 10 minutes max of them, so I can't really criticise them. But yeah, I kind of sort of missed out on that one, but it always just seemed to provide this sort of, counterbalance to the kind of Twilight movies, that, the how they make Gothenburg look so beautiful, kind of in this snow and dark, and like, it's genuinely one of the most kind of beautiful movies I've ever seen. Like, you always see sometimes snow on film and it looks quite boring or soundstagey, whereas this, it just seemed to look so great, and it really made all kind of the blood when it happened look all the more terrifying and richer. And I think it's definitely one of the best horror films that I've kind of ever seen. And as you say, it's ultimately a love story between two kind of young people. I think it would actually make an interesting double bill with something like Moonrise Kingdom, actually, if I come to think of it. Yeah,
no, actually, that's a good point. I think it would. But I mean, the performances of the two child actors are fantastic. I mean, I don't want to go too much into the plot, because there's some things which develop which you probably aren't expecting, but just makes you sort of rewatch the whole thing and question what you've seen and things like that. But it's just so beautifully handled. I mean, it's actually, and it's one, like I think you say, that managed to break out of that foreign language barrier. I mean, as much as people don't want to admit it, there is a huge sort of stigma and barrier to people watching foreign language films, certainly in the UK, I think, in other places as well, where I didn't pay to read a film, I want to watch a film, so anything with subtitles is difficult. But,
yeah, it's that classic, how can you watch a film if you're reading it? Like, it's that classic nonsense.
Yeah, but, I mean, it's one of those films. I mean, it's a terrible thing which they do. I mean, they've done it with Pan's Labyrinth, and they've done it with many other films where the trailers have a guy British speaking guy doing a voiceover over it, but it doesn't actually show you anyone speaking from the film, so you're lured into this false sense of security that you're about to watch a film which is not a foreign language film, and it turns out it is a foreign language film, and people come out going, what do you mean it's got subtitles, blah blah blah, and that's the movie. It's like when people got pissed off when they found out that Stephen Sondheim's Sweeney Todd of Demon Barber of Fleet Street was actually a musical, because it didn't actually feature any singing in the trailer. But this one managed to break out of that mold and become, I think it was a decent sized hit, but it was nominated for the BAFTA for best sort of European film, and for me it was the best European film I think I've seen in the last that was 2009, so nearly sort of 10 years I think. And it's one that I even saw, they actually turned it into a stage play. The National Theatre of Scotland turned it into a stage play, and I managed to catch a performance of that, and it was a really, really good adaptation of it, really cleverly done and stylized, and it's one of those stories which manages to basically sort of transcend the genre and basically break out of that and become a hit in any language, which is why they sort of remade it in the US as well.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, like, if that's your love for this movie is so clear for everyone to hear, like, what could possibly be your number one then?
Okay, my number one choice, my favorite European language film of all time, is Cinema Paradiso.
Excellent. I can already imagine why. So, kind of tell us why that this movie. I can almost picture it straight away.
But before I say, is this one of the? Is this one that you've seen, or is this another gap in your European?
This is one I've seen. I've thankfully seen that one.
Cool. Well, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it is a film set, Italian film from the 1980s, and it's a film about a young boy's sort of love of movies. Actually, technically, it's about a man's love of movies, because it starts off with a film director getting a phone call late at night, and he finds out that someone from his past has died, and he's sort of travelling back to his hometown for the funeral of Alfredo, who used to be the projectionist at the town cinema called Cinema Paradiso. And it sort of goes to flashbacks about the young Salvatore sort of growing up in the town and sort of watching all these movies, and sort of how he sort of strikes up an unlikely friendship with the sort of grumpy older projectionist who runs all the movies. And there's this sort of subplot where in the town all the films need to be sort of screened to the local sort of religious people and they basically demand that any scenes of nudity, any scenes of sex, or any scenes of kissing are cut out of the films, basically being censored. And basically, this leads to giant gaps in certain films where the crowd are outraged that they miss these important moments. But it's up to the projectionist to take all these moments out, and he sort of basically, against his better judgment, he ends up with his friendship with the young boy and basically teaches him how to project the films and screen the films. And then one day there's an accident at the cinema and there's a fire, and basically the projectionist ends up sort of losing his sight, and so Salvatore sort of takes over the projection of it. So it's just about this lovely story about this community, about how important cinema is to the community, but basically the young boy wants to become a filmmaker, and ultimately the older projectionist tells him that he has to leave home in order to pursue his dreams, and to never look back, never come back, because there's nothing for him there. And basically the film sort of culminates in this sort of returning home and sort of seeing his family for the first time in many years, since he's become a world famous director. And I mean, there's, even if you haven't seen the film, you might have seen, like, there's one particular segment which is it spoilers? I mean, it's difficult to say spoilers when you're talking about a film which is now nearly 40 years old. But he's been given a gift at the end of the funeral, which turns out to be a reel of all the footage which the projectionist had cut out of all the other films. So it's just like a 7-minute long reel of all these sort of romantic moments and sort of clinches and stuff like that. And the guy starts to cry, and basically anyone who's watching the movie at that point also starts to cry, because it's just a lovely sort of love note to the to the world of cinema and the power that cinema can have. And as a former projectionist myself, yes, that obviously has a special place in my heart. But when the Belmont Filmhouse, or Picture House as it was back in 2010, was threatened with closure due to sort of contracts and people wanting to take it on, but then didn't take it on, and then we didn't really know what was happening. It was an incredibly stressful time. But there was a lot of public support for we need this sort of cinema, and so one of the sort of things to bring about public awareness was we actually ran a screening of this to sort of kickstart that sort of thing, to get people to talk about the cinema and sort of talk to their councillors and say we still need this place to offer an alternative. If nothing, I mean, Aberdeen's got 4 cinemas, but you need an alternative to the multiplexes, and that was sort of what did it. And so that screening always has a special place in my heart, and that's why I picked that film.
Absolutely, and I could picture it perfectly when you pick that movie. Like, that connection between this movie and yourself is so clear for everyone to see. And only love for the Bellman as well, who love sharing our podcast tweets as well, and have always nice things to say as well. So only love to them, and I'm glad that they're still around. Aberdeen always needs a place like that. I mean, obviously I moved to Edinburgh when I was 18, but kind of in those sort of early teens, mid-teens as well, when I was sort of finding kind of like independent films, original films like that. Like, some of the films that I love so much, like a movie like Sideways, for example, 25th Hour. These were movies that I could only go and see in some place like the Belmont Cinema, and like I love it for giving me the opportunity and helping making me the fan that I am today, and only love for the Belmont and the Filmhouse.
Absolutely. And so, what have you got at the top of your list? Which gem have you picked for us?
Yeah, it's very hard to follow something like that, but I've kind of gone with Mia Hansen-Løve's Goodbye First Love. I don't know if you've seen this one.
I have not seen this one, so this is one I get to check out for the first time, so that's good.
Yeah, it's very much what I would call a Lee movie in a way. So this one it's very autobiographical for Mia Hansen-Løve, and it somewhat is for kind of, I suppose, anyone that's been kind of in love in their teenage years. The film stars the incredible Lola Creton, who to this day needs to be in more films. Like, she was in a kind of couple movies in and around this time. She was in Goodbye First Love, Something in the Air, randomly appeared in Hollyoaks Later, which was sort of a late night version of Hollyoaks, which was rather bizarre. But like, she is an incredible actress. She should be in more things. Like, I rewatched this the other day as part of my 52 films by women, and it was just like, I typed her name into Twitter, and so many of it was like, why isn't she appearing in more things? Where is she? She's a great actress. And it's bizarre as well, like, twice in this movie, a song that I love, The Water, performed by Laura Marling and Johnny Flynn, who is best known to Cineworld fans as the guy from the adverts that enjoys a tasty debrief and talking about Cineworld. So he's got a history with cinema long before even Beast. But kind of, the plot of Goodbye First Love is kind of quite simple, really. It's the story of Camilla, who at 15 years old, and she's got a 19-year-old boyfriend, Sullivan. And Camille is, madly in love with him. The way they talk about each other is it's that kind of teenage way that we all did. That when we sometimes watch these teenage movies, there's that kind of over dramatic stuff, but it doesn't perhaps have that cringe value that when we look back at things we probably said, and declarations of love that never kind of matched up, that Sullivan is going to be heading off to South America to go traveling and adventuring while she'll be staying back at home in France. She's kind of still 15, and there's a point where she's like, I'm going to cut my hair, and he goes, well, if you'll cut it, I'll leave you. And then she's like, well, if you do that, it's because I'll kill you and then myself. So it's very much in that sort of Romeo and Juliet, larger than life kind of romantic kind of comments, and it's about what kind of happens to kind of Camille over the next sort of 9 years, really. And he goes away, she struggles to move on from that kind of first love. She goes to university, she comes out of university and falls in love and gets into a relationship with her former architectural tutor and then employer, and Sullivan comes back into her life in the later years. And I just think it's such a great way of showing kind of teenage love and the kind of the consequences of that and how it kind of sticks with you, and you watch it and it's almost impossible not to draw parallels between kind of your relationships at the time, where it goes, how you feel, how that perhaps relationship always sticks with you, because it's, you know, that first love that, you know, when you think about the effect it has on you when it's there, when it's over, when you're discovering things about yourself, your body, your love, your life, it's so kind of overwhelming, and it is sickening, I can imagine, for parents to hear from it. I remembered, you know, my first teenage love, and, you know, she went away to study a year ahead of me, and I was sitting there back home, like, I remember one night being physically sick about the whole thing. It's just, you look back and you think, really, that's so bizarre, and it's a really good representation of that. And I think it's the way Mia Hansen-Løve writes a young teenage girl is incredibly real, and, you know, it's something that a lot of teenage girl characters tend to be written by men for the most part, so it's really good to kind of have that representation in kind of writing as well. And I think it's just a fantastic film, and I'd recommend people seek it out. It's, you know, Mia Hansen-Løve is, you know, gets a lot of love with things like her Girls on Tea top, for example. So this is one of the movies that I think is probably her best one. I'm sure there'll be some debate to be had about that, but I think this is definitely a very, very underrated film, and I know you can pick it up for like £6 or something like that in a place like Fopp. So I highly recommend it if people are wanting to kind of dive back into their teenage selves, perhaps.
Well, it's something I long to do every single day, so it's definitely going on my must-watch list, and I will definitely be checking that one out. So, is there anything that nearly scraped in?
Well, the difficult thing was like picking films that perhaps were of the same kind of country, like Hidden, Kasha, it was so close to making the list, but you can't knock, when your first film's a French film, you can't knock it off for something creeping into the top 5. So yeah, that was very close to getting in. What about for yourself?
Well, I mean, Orphanage was nearly my pick for Spain. I'm a sucker for a horror film, and I mean, some of the best horror films of the last sort of decade or the last 20 years have come from sort of Europe, sort of France. I mean, last year, Raw was another fantastic film, which, again...
Oh, Raw was amazing.
I mean, there are always films which, you know, they're classified as horrors over here, but there's a lot more to them, and, you know, that one is more of it was like a coming-of-age story set within a sort of cannibalistic horror film. So, I mean, there's always some fantastic horror films out there, but there was I could have basically filled it with on nearly 5 sort of Dario Argento films alone. Profondo Rosso, Deep Red is my personal favourite, but I've got a lot of time for Suspiria. But I mean, we could perhaps do an Argento episode when the new Suspiria comes out and do a compare and contrast, perhaps.
Consider it done.
Because I think I know you're definitely going to try and see it in London, but I have to wait.
I'm 100% going to see that one in London.
November the 16th now, so... but it's, I mean, the reviews that have come out of Cannes, you know, people saying, you know, it's either brilliant or terrible, but, you know, it's that thing that because it's trying to do something different and isn't your typical horror film, it's a bit arty. You know, people seem to hate that kind of thing when people do arty horror films, you know, like Nicholas Winding Refn, whatever. If it's anything like that, I will probably love every single demented minute of it, but...
Yeah, it is preaching to the choir. I cannot wait for that. I'm definitely up for that Dario Argento kind of fest, and you know, I think, you know, it's going to be a very exciting film. I'm so excited for it. I've not read a single review that's come out of it. I've seen some of the buzz, positive and negative, about the film, but boy, am I hyped to watch that at like 8:30 in the morning in a press screening in the middle of central London next month.
I think it'd be quite the experience for that. But yeah, there was one other film which nearly made my list for slightly sentimental reasons, and that was Betty Blue, but that was for
interesting.
It was one of those ones which I basically watched in my early teens when I shouldn't have, let's just say. It was on very late one night on Channel 4, and it's like, you know, after Eurotrash, if anyone remembers Eurotrash, when it was on the telly, it was one of those films which is certainly not, I hope that it shouldn't have been watched by a young teenager, and it was quite the eye-opener, let's just say, and it was always one of those things that I've always noticed that boys seem to get, young men seem to get the present of their own television in their room at a certain age, it's normally after the first time that you're all sat around watching something on at 9 o'clock on BBC or ITV that's got something slightly risky, and then everyone acts a little bit sort of, ooh, and then suddenly, oh, you can watch things up in your room, and yeah, we'll just leave you to it and not ask any more questions. So that was one of those films for me.
An insight into the King household.
But I'm sure it's a story which many other people of my age can probably relate to.
All too well. So obviously we won't be together next week, but we do have an episode coming out. You'll still get your fill. So this was an episode that I recorded at the beginning of last month with former filibuster guest Carlos Miranda. So we talked about Star Trek Deep Space Nine all the way back in January, and we've got an episode next week looking at kind of the promise, whether it was a fulfilled one or not, of Star Trek Voyager. So me and Dallas will be back together in 2 weeks' time, but hopefully you'll enjoy me and Carlos next week. But Dallas, if people wanted to keep in touch with you during this small sabbatical from filibuster, where will people find you?
I can keep the fires burning on Twitter at champcelluloid, or on my blog at championshipcelluloid.blogspot.com.
And you can find me on Twitter at Lee_Nostromo. I'm sure I'll be putting some holiday snaps up. I'm off to Budapest, but most excitingly, I'm going to be spending a day in Venice. And I've discovered that the before sunrise Ferris wheel is a mere mile from the bus stop that we're getting into. So I will be sure to visit, make a bit of a religious pilgrimage there.
Before sunrise Ferris wheel? Don't you mean the third man Ferris wheel?
Oh, of course. So
I'm from a different era, a different time.
So I will be going there. So I'll be sure to share some snaps with people on there. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and thanks to Sean for his suggestion. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to check out all these movies, Final Score, and we'll speak with you again in 2 weeks' time. Have a good one. Au revoir. Bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd Party.